All right, we're back with part 2 of this video on Lev Vygotsky, and we just covered some background information, his main ideas, which were sociocultural theory of cognitive development and the cultural historical activity theory. Sometimes it's just called activity theory. And then we talked about how it led to two main things in the field of education psychology, which were the zone of proximal development, which Jerome Bruner, we're going to talk about him now as well, was later on both a critic and contributor to the ZPD and of the main ideas of Lev Vygotsky, and he was the one that coined the term scaffolding and said, hey, moving kids from that range of what they don't know to what they can do with help, it's called scaffolding. And he coined that term, and now it's very, very popular. So that's where we were. We're going to keep going. Essentially, what I've said so far is that Vygotsky's thoughts, while they're so popular, they're so common, they were not without critic. And here's why. When you take something from Marxism, no matter how true it may be, or no matter how apparent it may be, first of all, people in more Western cultures will dislike this. They don't like to hear that you are a product of your social interaction. We like to think we're individuals. We're individuals who are who we are through choice and through free will, and we were not shaped and molded. It was interesting because Bruner was one of the main guys who later read Vygotsky's work. Really is like in the 80s, if I remember correctly. Vygotsky's work was never translated into English really until 1980s. And Bruner said, we should be careful to not overstate socialization as determination. Okay? That was one of Bruner's main critiques of Vygotsky. There is a little bit of a deterministic thing going on with Vygotsky's work. You're shaped and culture repeats itself, and there's not many outliers. You are who you are, and this is how you will be. And there's not a lot of room for individuals to break the mold. So Bruner said that it's really, really important that we don't overstate socialization and turn into determination. But as I also mentioned, he largely agreed with Vygotsky that learning is social, and that is where the theory of scaffolding comes into play. Because learning is mainly social, there needs to be people helping learners. There needs to be helpers who come alongside students and ensure that they can learn the right things. But he said scaffolders need to be sure to, first of all, be aware of their own biases and their own perspectives, but they need to be sure to teach openly, teach free-handedly. You aren't trying to control. You're not trying to shape in a way like the Hitler Youth. You're not trying to essentially recreate yourself as you scaffold. You need to teach openly. You need to teach multiple perspectives. You need to teach history, but also from both sides. Okay, you don't just teach one side. You don't teach a single story. Bruner was very clear that he did not think socialized learning effectively equated to determination. So, yeah, that was one thing that was a critic of Vygotsky. The other person who eventually got to, I guess, look at Vygotsky's work was Piaget. As I mentioned earlier, Vygotsky died in 1934, and his work was in Russian. Piaget was not Russian. Piaget, from what I've found online, Vygotsky read some of Piaget's work and disagreed with him, and he wrote but never openly critiqued Piaget. But Piaget read Vygotsky's work later on and actually thought it was very compelling. So here's the guy that we studied last week who just said, learning is mainly cognitive, and it's done in stages, and cognitive development just happens with time and with help, right? He didn't minimize help, but he didn't view it as entirely social either, like Vygotsky. But he later said, PJ came out and said, Vygotsky's theories, why is this all bold? Made sense. And in fact, the parts that he really liked was the idea that Vygotsky had these basic tasks. If you're building knowledge socially, there has to be some, and you're scaffolded, there has to be a point in which there's something you can do, and then socially you add to that. He created these basic tasks, these basic things that little kids can do all on their own. I just changed my website page. Oh my goodness. I want to apologize. I lost my page. Well, anyway, basic tasks. It's in the video that I know you guys watched a moment ago. I didn't write my notes down because I have my notes page up and I must have closed it. But it's, I feel bad. One moment. Let me find these. They can think, reason, make moral judgments, and no. It is in that video, you guys. I'm so sorry. It's in this video right here, the Sprout Schools. And I just completely lost my web page notes, so I want to apologize for that. But he did agree with the basic tasks, okay? So he said they make sense, and it makes sense that these are the basic tasks that a kid could do. Ultimately, Piaget also disagreed. I guess he agreed with Brunner, but he also disagreed that cognitive development was, I guess we call it hypersocial. That's what Vygotsky would have thought. It's hypersocial. He just thought his early work minimized the social side of learning too much, but it wasn't the hypersocial that Vygotsky shared. So Piaget also disagreed that cognitive development was hypersocial. He insisted that it was a combination of maturity, time, stages, and socialization. Yeah. Piaget had a bit more of a mold breaker mentality. You can be who you want to be. It's not just predetermined by your culture and upbringing. Now, let's talk briefly, and this is where we're going to end today, the major effects on education. I'm going to make this a new page real quick. This is where I really want to spend a moment. The reason why we study Vygotsky in education psychology is because there are practices that come from Vygotsky, whether or not they know it. Okay? So let's just, first of all, make sure we got this out of the way. So, under Vygotsky's theories is the idea that each learner has these three things, right? This is the ZPD. Capabilities on their own, capabilities that they can do with help, and incapabilities that they can't do with help or on their own. Oops, caps locks. Okay, and let's use the example of like a 7-year-old. Okay, I was recently working with some 7-year-olds, The 7-year-old that I was working with was my niece, and I won't say her actual name. So let's just say her name was Julia. Okay, 7 years old. Okay, and let's just say she can read small picture books. She can read little kids' things, but she cannot read a chapter book. Her capability on her own is these picture books. Her incapability is a chapter book. The role, therefore, of a teacher is to go to this in-between. The teacher's job. Start bridging this gap. Okay, we're going to bridge the gap between capability and incapability. So we're going to find the books that are in between the picture book and the chapter book, and we're going to sit down together and we're going to read it. I'm going to teach you phonics so that you can decode these bigger words on your own. And I'm going to teach you how to recognize some patterns so that when you get to that word you don't know, you can actually get to it, right? Teaching you strategies like sounding it out, and teaching you strategies such as taking letters or words that look similar that you already know and applying those to the words you don't know. Okay, so that's the teacher's job, is to bridge the gap. Again, this is called scaffolding. And that is how Julia can go from not being able to read a chapter book to reading a chapter book. Once she gets the chapter book down, then hopefully she gets to a point where she's able to use those skills more and more and more and build her own repertoire of reading skills. But until the teacher does this, Julia will not learn to read. That is a Vygotskyan assumption. If the teacher does not do this, Julia will not learn it. If you take my Lit and Literacy class, you will hear that I actually believe this. I do not think reading is naturally, it is not natural. You will not learn to read if you are not taught to read. There is nothing, at least in the English language, that is so just natural to our brains that you can just pick up a book and read because you're 18 years old all of a sudden. Nope, does not happen. If you don't know how to read and you are not taught to read, you will always struggle. There is very, very little research that shows people just learning to read on their own. Okay, so Vygotsky's theories in this sense would be true, and it would inform majorly practices in fields like literacy, teaching a kid to read, okay, mathematics. If you've ever seen math start with a basic lesson, go to the next lesson, go to the next lesson, and it's continually building on lesson 1 becomes lesson 2, and then lesson 2 pulls a little bit from lesson 1 and grows. That is Vygotskian in nature, okay? Sequential learning of math, okay? Some major publishers that do this would be like a Saxon Math, right? Saxon, if you guys ever are familiar with Saxon Math, it is all about that scaffolding process within math. Some other things. These are not subjects, but grouping. Okay, the idea of grouping is very Vygotskian. When you have your lows, your mediums, and your highs, or maybe you have your pull-out classes, or maybe you just have a title course. You put all of your lows in a different class altogether. So it's groups, it's pull-outs, title course. I shouldn't have put these in parentheses. Okay. This is the idea that you are trying to group students according to their level, and that level reflects a certain capability, and it represents certain incapabilities, and the teacher can then focus on providing scaffolding to that level. So once again, we see Vygotsky's theories as a big part of education. The final thing I want to say that the major effect it's had on education is the entire concept of intervention. You guys, the word intervention might be the third most used term in education, or maybe number 2. I don't know. Obviously, the word relationships is probably number 1. I think the term intervention is number 2. Intervention. First of all, what is it? For those that don't know, intervention is a Vygotskian idea, quite simply. It comes from Vygotsky. It's the idea that a teacher needs to or should take one-on-one or small group instruction periods. It could be in a class or it can be a separate class to help students who are struggling at grade level concepts. Okay, and this is where you get like your MTSS or your RTI, depending on the state you're in. Montana is MTSS, and you have your tier 1, your tier 2, and your tier 3. And your tier 1 is just your general population, your general class. What do you do to help all kids learn? Your tier 2 would be still in class. What do you do to help the kids who didn't get it the first time? And then your tier 3 is usually a separate class. What do you do? To help the kids who seemingly can't get it and are therefore behind significantly. Okay, so that's where we get interventions. The term interventions is very Vygotskian. So essentially what I just described is probably half a school day. We're talking about most of our literacy instruction, most of our mathematics instruction, our grouping tactics, and the idea of intervention all comes from Vygotsky. That's pretty massive. That's a huge effect on education. So, okay, so this is our notes page for the week. I will delete some words. You can fill them out as I share this. Obviously, I'm telling you it's way too late. But if that helps you learn, I want you to do it. And then, like I said, your assignment for the week is going to be a response to 4 questions. Okay? Response to 4 questions. Essay. I want roughly, I want 200 words per response. So this is a bit bigger, but I think this is a really important thing to get. We got to get the